I want to welcome everybody here to meeting Sarah DaVanzo, who she's been on my radar. You've been on my radar for,
Oh,
I don't know, 3 or 4 years at least. And I was one of the first people off the mark. As soon as I saw this, I've got to have that Inside Alchemy. Why? Because I wear shirts like this. And because the whole thing about life is we can take it too seriously, but we also read it on the surface. And the thing about alchemy, it's symbols on symbols, layer upon layer upon layer, and there's so
right,
much history there. And those of you who know me know that I'm a historian as well, and
right.
I've been looking at alchemical stuff. I had the Paracelsus book from when I was 15. That sort of stuff. I've been a geek and a nerd, I admit. Now, Sarah, I just want to say, tell us how it started. Where did this come from? I mean, you told us a little bit in the intro about
Sure,
what do you
sure.
call
Well,
it,
first of all,
COVID,
also,
but where did it start?
absolutely. So it's so lovely to talk to you. Every time I speak with you, it's magic. And thank you for sending me the poem on curiosity. So I just want to shout
Oh,
out on that. The genesis for Insight Alchemy was during COVID.
yeah.
And during COVID, we all wondered what we were doing and, where the world was going. And as a futurist, I kept thinking about the future and what do we need to get ourselves out of this pickle. And so I reached out to 25 futurist friends around the world to get their perspective on what's the future of enlightenment? What's the future of insight? Which was a curious topic because typically you're not asked about a conceptual topic,
Mm.
an idea, a
Yeah.
future of philosophy, maybe the future of capitalism or the future of democracy, sure.
Yeah.
But the future of insight and the future of enlightenment seemed to throw everybody off. And they dug into it because it was so interesting. And I received all of these little surveys back from the community,
Hmm.
or rather essays, and some
Yeah.
of them, and one poem. And it struck me that, this is a moment to really reflect because the responses were so varied. And they're in here, they're all in here as little
Yeah.
essays. But what then it struck me is that this needs to be shared, right, with the world. And there was an artist who I had been admiring in Germany who's a rhizograph. This is a zine, a printing process, which is a Japanese like photocopy technique from the 1960s,
Yep.
and it used vegetable inks. And you might have seen it because it's very famously, usually there's neon colors involved,
Yep.
like the neon colors. And
Yep.
so she's a rhizo designer. Here's a great example because the colors are popping, right?
Yeah.
I reached out to her, she's in Germany, and I said, I have this idea of talking about, the future of insight. And specifically, I had this brainchild of gold, and I'll get to that in a second. And I think it's right up your alley. So Hannah Pullman was my collaborator, and we worked together. I was a creative director and writer, but she helped me figure out how to produce it because it's layered inks. So we collaborated across ocean over the course of a year and got a printing group out of Brooklyn, New York, to who are arty group that do Rhizo to then start in. So it was a trifecta of intelligence involved here, lucky Rhizo. And what ended up happening was, as I was reading through the essays from the futurists and thinking about insight myself, the metaphor of gold and specifically alchemy came to mind. And for I don't even know if you know this, but I spent 10 years in the gold industry,
I've been
in
following
South
you,
Africa.
Sarah.
Right, 10 years, right? That's a
Yep.
long time. But in that process, helped to build the Gold of Africa Museum and was responsible for R&D and innovation in gold, and that's medical gold, dental gold. It's all sorts of our gold artifacts. Building the Gold of Africa Museum, like you, we had to look at the history of gold on the African continent. So you can't do the future unless you know the past, right?
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
of my favorite topics. And so it struck me that there were so many similarities in terms of how we go about, insights and foresight in the gold industry. So just simplistically, it's in here, you mine for the gold, you looking for scanning for signals, right? So that's just raw material, right? The raw material of what that gets us thinking. But then we have to refine the material as we go through frameworks and methodologies. We're refining it literally. And then you've got bullion. Okay, so now I've got a material to work with, but still it takes the human craftsmanship of the storyteller. And something that you and I love to talk about is, you can have a pretty accurate view of how the world's going to be. Let's imagine you just use data or AI in that respect,
Mhm.
but it's still about how do you communicate that in a way that it's going to be actionable to make change or to get the receiving audience to really understand it. And that I liken to like the Fabergé egg, right? You can have some gold bullion, but still you have the craftsmanship of the goldsmith. And in the booklet, I actually show the cost variable, the margins of what it costs to get something out of the ore, tons of ore, and to get 1 grain of a little object of desire out of gold. And the margin or the value is actually in the last stage of the craftsmanship, because it's so difficult and not commoditized. And that's what's beautiful. Everyone has their own styles of delivery.
Yep.
And so alchemy is okay, the science and the art. I think to put it very simplistically, all right. And so, and exactly what we're talking about with foresight is it's a science. There's rigor, there is data. It's not just sticking your finger to the wind and just feeling around. If you're going to be reliable and trusted by, large corporations or institutions who are relying a lot on your accuracy and equity,
Mm-hmm.
important
Mm-hmm.
equity, that your representative futures, not just your little ecosystem or
Siloed.
algorithm bubble, right? Especially representing indigenous communities or previously disadvantaged communities or marginalized communities and so forth. Do we have that in that rigor? But then it's the craftsmanship of extrapolating, interpolating, and cogitating on the material to transform it. And alchemy, at its root, for those who are not familiar with alchemy, is all about transformation. It's literally transformation. So the moth or the chrysalis to the butterfly, that's often a metaphor used in the world of alchemy.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And so then you've got two worldviews coming together. You've got the scientific, and
Mm.
the first part of your book, you've got that beautiful stuff about how many whales it would take to go down the deepest 4 kilometer mine. You've got, well, and then you change to a much more what I would call metaphysical kind of way of
Yes,
looking at things. That there's a metaphysics of insight.
yes,
It's not
yes,
simply extrapolating from data.
sure.
Okay, and that's where you start talking about curiosity and
Yes.
so on. So let's pick up, could we pick up the story from there? Because I
Yeah,
really
sure.
love this stuff on curiosity that you talk about and the way you play with it with, what's it, the periodic table at the back of the book.
Yes.
And that's, so let's go the next step of the journey, Sarah. Can
Okay.
you fill that in for us, please?
So, okay, an alchemist is an explorer, right? An alchemist is in the pursuit, ultimately is in the pursuit of purity, right? And is pursuing the elixir of life, to put it bluntly. They're trying to transmute and transform chemistry that ultimately could be potentially something that would give us eternal life. That was the ultimate goal, right? So that's exploration. And I discovered, so, as you know, I lived in and worked in your part of the world for 10 years and then in Africa for 10 years. So most of my life, well, 2/3 of my life was spent living and working in developing markets.
Yeah.
And what struck me, so clearly I'm curious because I was putting myself in all sorts of adventurous, curious places, China, India, Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, all over the world. And it struck me that there were cultural differences and nuances in the way that people explore. And I noticed that a very Western, I'm originally from New York City, a very kind of New Yorker way of exploring the world is not at all like someone from Mali Africa,
Yeah.
okay, on the west coast of Africa. And it has to do with culture, has to do with language, has to do with frameworks, ways of thinking. And what I discovered is the beauty is when you mix people from different cultures into problem solving. And so as someone in innovation, that's where I work today, using foresight for innovation. The more diversity, the better, right? So at the core of this is curiosity begets exploration behaviors,
Mm.
begets discovery, right? And so I became deeply curious about curiosity. So that's meta-curious.
Yeah.
It's circular. And I took some time out to pursue some studies in education. And I heard in the coursework, I was getting a master's in education, and it was education science. And specifically, the challenges that the educators were having were, how do you maintain interest and curiosity of your students? And I was doing this for at the university level. How do even university students, how do you continuously pull, and especially today, right? This is your world. You're a master of that.
Yeah.
But today, with such eclectic classrooms, right? Different cultures, you're dealing with these different modalities. So I pursued a master's degree in this. My thesis was on cultivating curiosity in classrooms of diverse cultures, right? And what became clear to me, there were four archetypes, and it traces back to animal behaviors and exploration. So I did a lot of animal, research into animal behavior and psychology in terms of interest and attraction and things like that. So at first is they look around, so you see. Okay, there's visual curiosity. I see the ship on the horizon. I'm curious about my environment, and I call those the lookers. Okay, and
Hmm.
there's a second modality, which is there are lookers, and then there are thinkers. Right, there are people who are intellectually asking questions. That tends to be where we in our society. It's not in every culture, but in Western society, it's like asking questions is the way that you manifest curiosity. It's one of four, I believe.
Yeah.
Thinking. So I call them the thinkers. So you've got the lookers and the thinkers. Okay. And then you have two other styles of exploration that you can see in animals as well as humans, which is one is a feeling. Okay. Some people are thrill seekers. They'll be bungee jumping. They'll be,
Yeah.
roller coastering. They'll be eating exotic foods. They'll be, looking at the visceral experience of exploration. I mean, alchemists used to even taste the chemistry. There
Oh,
was, there was
they
lots of,
died as a
yeah, and
result.
died as a result of it. We're
Yes.
very Darwinian, right? Exactly.
Mm.
Only the strongest or the fittest alchemists survived. But the point is there is a way that we explore the world. We poke things, and then that leads to the fourth. The fourth is what I actually do call the doer or the poker who's building something. There are
Yeah.
those that construct tools. So if you look at black birds, such as crows and ravens, which is the corvid
Yeah.
denomination of bird.
Yeah.
They are very famous for all four. So looking, okay, so they see, feel, think, and do.
Mm.
And they play, they explore with tools. They're incredibly acute vision of noticing anything out of place. They problem solve. They do wacky things just to feel. They roll around in snow, and they roll, and they do. You can see lots of videos online of animals, especially really intelligent ones like corvids and octopus and others that have demonstrated higher thinking order in exploring the world in these ways. And so it struck me when we were doing this book about, the using the alchemy or alchemical metaphor, cabinets of curiosity. Think about that, right?
Mm.
Cabinets of curiosity were inspirations for alchemists. Okay, but if they were also, as those who know or historians, they were also to show off that you traveled and that you had money to collect objects of desire from around the world. But they were also used to stimulate thinking. They were, odd, curious little objects, and people would be like, "What is this?" And that was stimulating intellectually. They might be furry objects or
Yeah.
golden objects. And so they are actually cabinets of curiosity, many, many writings. And when you look at etchings of books about alchemists, they often have vast cabinets of curiosity in their studio
Mm.
laboratories.
Mm. Yeah.
So there's a connection there. There's a connection there. And I tried to bring that out in the project.
Yeah. No, it's and it is there. I mean, you've got it's because it's beautiful. It attracts. So I think that feeling is part. Beauty is part of the feeling that you're talking about there, but it's also a very nice journey into sometimes quite mainstreamy sort of stuff, like, let's say, how much gold is there on the planet, at other times quite offbeat sorts of things. But you actually do build in a method. So you've got your four states of curiosity, and but there's a methodological component
Yes.
here.
Yes.
And I think that's probably where we go next. So, my Corvid brain says, okay, I like to play with stuff. I definitely love to do. I'm a thrill seeker,
Yes.
I'm a feeler, but I am a looker and I'm a thinker. So, I can see all of those components in my own persona or way of engaging with the world. So can you walk us through your method, please, Sarah? For that would be really cool next.
Okay, sure. So, so from that perspective, so let's imagine a couple things. You have to ground rules here are that there is, okay, to put it very simplistically, curiosity can be intrinsic or extrinsic, right? So you are somebody can have right. I'm driven internally I'm very curious about a topic or topics or the world because of it gives me satisfaction, and it's often the itch that needs to be scratched. But also, I could be your boss and I could say, Marcus, I need you to research this project, and that's an extrinsic driver, right? So now you have to research something because you're going traveling, or you have to research it because your boss gives you your instructor, right, yeah, a to-do list, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is that it's also important to recognize that think about the T-shaped person, right? We also hear about there is very clearly in my research that we also toggle between being generally curious about all sorts of things, okay, aware, and different people vary, and that has become very clear in my research that your level of general curiosity about all the issues, which we make a joke about the Renaissance man or people who are polymaths, okay, the polymathy, the generalist. Okay, but then they have the deep curiosity because I'm very interested in motorcycles or horses or certain kinds of literature or right. And so you have this T, right? And what we have, unfortunately, let's talk about this. In society today, we have valued or valorized the deep curiosity, the specialist, and not the polymath. And that comes, unfortunately, at the same time that we started to valorize STEM over the humanities, right? All around the world. Okay, it's in North America, in the Europe, and in Australia, right? The curricula change, and so we've and social media drives that too because it celebrates the person with the brand. I'm the brand, I'm the curiosity lady. So that's my thing. So I'm going to go deep on that. Or I'm the red boots lady, or I'm the making the cakes that have chocolate chips on them. Like whatever that so there's a reason for that society has rewarded that. And the job descriptions. I need a data analyst. I just need you to do the data analyst. I don't need you to do the research or anything else. I want highly specialized, industrialized so that we can like get put you into the cogs. So I think it's important to note that I think society suffers, and with artificial intelligence, we have a curiosity apathy. It's being written and studied about. There's many studies that have come out in 2025, just recently, that are showing the addiction to generative AI and search, and specifically around how your mind can get lazy and dependent, and then you're not being a generalist, you're not being a specialist, you're kind of checking out, and that's a big danger. Okay, and then so I said, first of all, we've got the generalist, we've got the specialist, we have the intrinsic versus the extrinsic. Okay, but then you have a cadence of life. So some folks are most curious Monday through Friday. Some are very curious on Sundays and Saturdays. Some are curious at night versus that. We have also times of days and context, right? And so there's cadence. And when I would work with some people, like a class or a company,
Yep.
there would be a diagnostic that it's self-reported, but it also can be reported if there's observation. There can be I can observe you over a period of time. But the idea is you're starting to understand, see how people are behaving and how they self-observe themselves and their
Yeah.
behaviors. And you get a profile. And that profile now is centered on all of these things I've talked about, but also identifies where you're leaning against the four types of curiosity. You know, see, feel, think, do, right?
Hmm.
And it gives you, if you think about it like a spider graph, Marcus, it kind of gives you a shape. That's you at this moment. And what's fascinating is, as I've done this research with people at many points in their life, it
Mm.
changes. It changes based on life circumstances. It
Okay.
changes because you woke
Makes
up
sense.
and you're early in the morning and you're just not thinking right. But when you're doing a problem solving exercise or an innovation sprint, and now I've come, so you are here at this moment in this room. I need to get the lay of the land of where are you, so that we can put people together.
Mm.
So you want as much diversity as possible. And what we do find is that, and I've found people who have worked to stretch their curiosity, if you will, profile so that they're quite balanced across the four: seeing,
Hmm.
feeling, thinking, and doing, going through. Well, an unintended consequence is those people are very, very influential, meaning they are recognized by their peers as being magnets, attractive, people you want to be around. And so they have larger social networks. So those that, you know, think about it, those that do the adventure, that eat the crazy food, that go on the festivals, that build stuff, that are intellectually stimulating, that see patterns, which is seeing trends as
Hmm.
part of that. Those tend to be very, you know, socially influential people. And so the methodology, if I'm going to that, is unpacking these layers
Yeah.
of the complexity of curiosity to
Mm.
give a dimension, to give self-awareness of
Yep.
where I sit right now, so I can actively work to stretch my curiosity muscles like a gym, and also understand where I might also have a superpower. I
Yeah.
could be a superpower in certain places. And can I digress to tell you a really interesting story about
Stories are
Burning?
good. We welcome stories.
Okay, so at Burning Man last year, I was running a series of curiosity workshops in the desert, like, as you know, like
Yeah.
Burning Man is nothing. So I had, you know, no flip charts, no post-its that you can't, you know, nothing, for fear it might fly away. Like there's literally, so everything I had to be like heavy, like weighted and brightly colored, painted and fluorescent so I could see it, and be very, very simplistic. And but I was able to bring, you know, you can have like whiteboard paddles, individual little paddles, so people could whiteboard ideas as we were doing the research.
Hmm.
So the objective was to use the curiosity methods in a workshop environment over a series of days, to invent ways to cool people in places, to solve the
Okay.
existential climate problem, because we're out in the desert and it's a big problem every year at Burning Man, this heat. And as you can imagine, as you
Yeah.
know, Australia, I've been many times, it's boiling
Yeah.
hot.
Yeah.
And so, in extreme weather. And so, we were trying to come up for solutions that would be zero carbon, right? Like no CO2. And so, to help reduce the carbon footprint of the festival. And
Mm.
what was interesting there was, in the workshops, I encountered someone who arrived to the workshop completely stark naked,
Yeah.
painted in blue, head to toe in blue, right? Like, in the blue paint. And I started talking to him, and I soon learned that he had multiple sclerosis. He had MS. And I soon realized that he was paralyzed on one side of his body, on this side. He had no use of his hand, his
Uh-huh.
or really his leg. It was really, he was very disadvantaged with his entire left side
Yep.
of his body. And so everything he did with was right hand side. And so as I got to know him over this through the exercise, he explained to me that because of this, his right side of his brain has enormous. He's had CAT scans, and it had to compensate for his left side of his body. And
Yep.
so it is physically larger in his brain. And as a result, he has extreme verbal and a diplomatic and spatial capabilities. He has intuitive. We talked about the curiosity styles.
Mhm.
His feeling,
Yep.
his seeing and feeling, his intellectual, but his not. He couldn't do the making, right? He couldn't do the makings. He didn't have
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
faculties to do that. So he was very, very strong, especially in emotive and also the feeling side of things, and also the thinking side. Okay, so I saw it in action.
Mm.
There was a moment where someone was around, we were in a round circle and talking, and there was a lot of people, and someone got very, a man, an older man, got very emotional about a climate issue that was part of it. We were talking about the workshop, very emotional, and it got awkward. Like it was, he got so, the man got so upset. And my friend, Matthew, who has superpowers and curiosity because of what would be perceived in society as a disability, living with a disability was actually an unbelievable superpower. He saved the day. He was the first person to help this man and deflect the conversation. And immediately he did the way that he managed the environment. He wasn't even the man. I was the MC, but he swept in, and everyone who knew about his superpower, his curiosity superpowers, were able to instantly see it in action. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So what's fascinating is that we all have from our life scars, challenges,
Mhm.
opportunities, a different level of how we've developed. And your unique curiosity style could be very appropriate for a certain kind of problem or a different kind of, definitely for adding a complementary, if you will, mindset to a problem solving or innovation in that respect. So that was to illustrate that
Amazing.
we all skew at different moments. And so as I've said, as I work with people over their lifespans, like someone who was going through a divorce, really what became withdrawn and became much more intellectual and didn't want to like go out and do
Yeah.
that, but was just reading a lot. And that was really what was heightened because that person was in a different state, right? Um, so does that seem like it answers a little bit of your question?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's there's to me the big question is that alchemy for me suggests something beyond the ordinary.
Mhm. Yes.
And yeah, so this little series that we're going to fit this talk into is called Futures Feelings, as
Yeah.
opposed to thinking. And the future's feelings can be are culturally defined.
Uh-huh.
So for me, in my little book that I'm sending you a copy of, I make it very explicit that for me, that's quite spiritual because I'm drawing on traditions that use the language of spirituality, the
Mhm.
understanding of relationships. But then again, with alchemy, which is more occulty in its origins, is seeking to cut through and create pathways through symbolic language that goes beneath the surface. So it doesn't read gold as the superficial material, it reads gold as consciousness or as whatever you want to talk. So
Right.
there's
Right.
always these other languages at work and other intentions. And I'd be really interested to hear how, this would be sort of like the second last question for you, and at least this time around. How do you, in your own relationship to the book, to the process, to insight, how do you feel the alchemical working in you? If I can be so bold. Sorry.
Um, I'm deeply affected by the cultures that I've lived in. Okay.
Mm,
And so, especially obviously the indigenous cultures are what's attractive to me as opposed to the Europeans that were expats that were in these markets. So, and I am, I think I've taken with me that, an understanding. Certainly I've been exposed to many religions, across the globe, I've
Yeah.
traveled around the world once by boat, once by airplane, twice. And the number of countries or markets that you want to say are, are well north of 100. So I've exposed to lots of different ways and modalities of communication and um, aesthetic. I think that's really important
Beautiful.
because art is a manifestation and a reflection of culture, clearly. And I think that language is culture, art is culture, the behavior is culture, right? The definition of culture. But I think being I like to call myself a culture cartographer.
Nice.
I have a lot of books, a lot of map books. Being someone who's a cultural strategist by life choice, I think is has informed my thinking about alchemy. I believe in the supernatural. I mean, now we're going to get it. Maybe, I'll turn off some of your audience, but I'm absolutely there with the aliens.
I'm with
I'm
you, Sarah. I'm with
Okay.
you.
Okay. Well, I spent a lot of time in the alien and the UFO world, and I spent a lot of time thinking about parallel universes and fractal of universes, and so I like to think about because you know what? It's funny, Marcus. I discovered about a decade ago. I went to a festival in Wales, which I highly recommend. It's called the How the Light Gets In Festival, and it's a philosophy art festival, music, art, and philosophy. It's called How the Light Gets In. It's at the same time as the Hay Festival for literature, so it's fabulous. It's right next to the town of Hay, and I learned a decade. I've been in the future space for now 20 years. Since I got into gold, you have to be in futures, literally gold futures, right? You're projecting the future
Yes.
of the demand. And I've been in the gold industry. I was in the gold industry, started in 1996, right after apartheid ended. I was there restructuring and helping to restructure the South African gold industry to create jobs and build a museum and do all that stuff because they were so they had a value and there was this asset, but it wasn't being utilized for the good of the populace. Anyway, my point is I learned that philosophers are futurists and futurists are philosophers at this festival because it was a philosophy festival, but the conversations constantly turned to futurism and the entanglement, if I use quantum,
Yep.
I think quantum physics is a great body of science that is really relevant to foresight in the
Mm.
future world
Yep.
because the concepts of entanglement and and duality are really you can bring them as metaphors into the space. So I guess to go back to your question is what's shaped my thinking has been the exposure to cultures,
Yep.
has been the openness to crypto science. Okay, that's what crypto science, right? UFOs and all that stuff is all about unknown sciences or alternative sciences. My interest in magic, I've been very interested in magic lately, magic tricks and trying to learn them and try. I think the whole world of magic and mystery is is very to me it's very attractive. I think also then the idea of philosophy. So I think that's a convergence, Marcus, of maybe like four things. Maybe it's a superfecta of influences that are kind of coloring my approach. One thing I can say though is with the project, I'm on my second project now, by the way. It's similar but different. Is that how on earth I approached it? I was like, I would never want to have a book about curiosity and the future that was just a textbook of written words. It's
Yeah.
the antithesis. It needs to be a journey. And by the way, it's not meant to be consumed as one from front to back. It's meant to be consumed in little bites, like just pick it up and read through, see the page. But I think that also, if you're talking about a topic as exciting as curiosity and futures and foresight and futurism, imagining alternative futures, I think then the delivery mechanism back to that way that you communicate is important, and it
Yeah.
should inspire the senses as well. I don't know. That's kind of what's
Yeah.
driving.
No, that I mean, it's a great and it's really interesting for me because if I and your book makes a good argument for the alchemy of metaphor, for instance.
Mhm. Yes.
So, and of course, the whole book is metaphoric at multiple levels.
Mhm.
So, the futurist as alchemist
Yes.
is a very nice metaphor where the futurist is after provoking, but perhaps also evoking elements that are within the context but are not perceived at first
Mhm.
within the context. You could say they're imminent. They're floating there, part of the space, you might say. But there's
Yeah.
something else there, and to me, that's the alchemist's role, because historically, alchemists were seeking, as you said at the beginning, the, let's say, eternal life, or that transformative elixir that will provide
Mhm.
transcendence of some kind, or transformation.
Mhm.
Transformation. So to futurists are about that, but it's not cognitive or thinking transformation. It's much more to do with how you feel in the world.
So yes, so your
So,
feeling
yeah.
concept, like the feeling of the future. Um, yeah, I think so. First of all, that's a very original uh, space to be in, and I hope that you like continue to double down in that world, because I wish that our field of foresight spent more time in the feeling the future and the feeling space, because it's very intellectual, or it's very, here are the signals and the data, and I go back again, it's all in the execution, right? It's like that Fabergé egg, and that has to all be about feeling. And so much of the work I've done has been for either institutions or corporations,
Yeah.
and there's a resistance to the future, or they don't get it because it's not their world. And so getting them to embody it, feel it, would be the ultimate success,
Yeah.
right? And that's hard. So um, feeling the future, if you feel something, I think then there's passion. I think there's an assumption of passion. And isn't that the point, to get people passionately curious about the future and passionately driven to change the future? I mean, look, we're all talking about designing futures, right? We're talking about, I mean, why would we go into the field? It's not just for looking at our navel gazing, right? We're doing it because we're trying to make change,
Yeah.
positive change, obviously preferable futures, right? And so I think in order to have people have conviction to make change, which is hard.
Mm.
So being in the field, it's really hard to galvanize people about something that's unknown and kind of unproven, certainly the future. And some will say it's unknowable even. It's not possible to know it, so there's real reticence. But that it's very hard to maintain momentum.
Yeah.
And so when you have people who are passionate about a vision of the future, or about a path to the future, which is, if I'm going to make that connection to passion and feeling, which I think you would agree with,
Mm.
then it's going to be easier to stay the course and have conviction in the face of lots of obstacles. Because I think a part of one of the skills of I like to call them people who enforce it, I like to call them tomorrowers. I know it's my term, just
Cool.
because I think tomorrowing is kind of what we are about. If you're afraid of this word of futures, tomorrowing. So the traits of tomorrowers is tenacity, is one of the most important traits. To have conviction and tenacity, and I think in order to have that, feeling it is really important, or to convey feeling
Yeah.
is important skill.
Mm.
And right, so therefore design fiction or speculative fiction or experiences, or however you want to go forward, is a way to, or something like this, a piece of art, right, is to that's, there's I've been very fortunate in recent years to be introduced to some artists who are in the foresight world.
Yeah.
And that's a really provocative, and that's a really exciting place to be, because that's truly feeling the future through art. And it seems to be a discipline that is actually being pursued. Like there are PhDs of like art and foresight and things, in around the world. Um, and that's, well, how do you interpret it, Marcus? How do you interpret feeling the future? What are your thoughts on that?
For me, it's a deep engagement with presence with a community that you're working with. For me, I do a lot of embodied stuff. I will dance or move or play in terms of playback, or I use Interplay, which is a beautiful system of what I think of as hacking consciousness through the body. So
Oh, okay.
I start here. But, I'm curious also because, and I'm using that word deliberately, because part of your network here, this is this lovely one here,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. All the
you've
different.
got the flaneur. So to me,
Yeah.
to be passionate and to be, to you try. There's an urgency about dealing with issues for the future, but we also have to go slow. We have to be able to be the flaneur. That's the slow wandering down the street, smelling the croissant from the bakery and hearing a girl laugh down the street with her boyfriend or whatever it might be. That kind of slow presencing. And of course, I like to do that myself in nature because to me the future is not just anthropocentric. It's a very holistic ecological future. The more than human comes in. So that's how I do it. And my metaphor for all of that, there are two metaphors I play with. One is that the futurist, when you go into a space, is a shaman, which is like your alchemist. So for me,
Okay.
I started off with the shaman. One
Yeah.
foot here, one foot somewhere else, over there somewhere. And the other one is that the future exists in the present because it's producing pheromones that attract us.
Huh. That's very
And
interesting.
so that's the way I work. And then when I'm with people, I am very much in their space. I can't drag them into my space of intellectual or aesthetic or whatever. I listen, and like you would do when you're in a boardroom or something, we have to
Right.
be where they are, and then we have to, as I said before, bring out the imminent stuff. So that's the alchemical. Let the gold rise to the surface through whatever happens to come to hand. And I think because I'm like you, there's something more than happening.
Yes.
I think
Yes.
that we get helped in those spaces
Yes.
when you're open.
You just that's wonder. Thank you for explaining that. And your concept of the pheromones, it really speaks to me, and I love it. It reminds me of an essay I was working on about curiosity not being an emotion or a behavior, but being external to us and
Mm.
actually being a sprite. And
Yeah,
is
nice.
something, is right. And that's like kind of it reminds me of the pheromone being pulled to it. And the little, the writing that I was playing with was about what if I'm just conjuring the conditions for the sprite. So because it is, by the way, the conditions, you do set the conditions for curiosity. You can absolutely, there are, this environment will work.
Mm,
I mean, I'm saying is like I can easily make an environment where you will not be curious. It's
absolutely.
easy to make that,
Yeah, just a classroom
stress,
anywhere around the world.
harshness. You're right, exactly. So, all kinds of, but you can also, conversely, you can create an environment which is like Burning Man or a book festival or philosophy festival, or it could be just a quiet library, or, that will also conjure this sprite. And I play with this because this sprite, as you can imagine, what an impish kind of sprite might be is, maybe troublesome and maybe doing things, and
A mischievous.
we're like cats, that's the laser pointer or whatever it is getting our attention to things, and we are not in control. And I
Mm,
love this idea of it being externalized. And so your idea of the future emitting pheromones is also this concept of it's something outside of us
yeah,
that is pulling us and attracting us, and we're out of control. We're the moth just pursuing the pheromones, right? And
absolutely.
I think that that's a really provocative metaphor from. So metaphor. I guess the point is that both of us
It
use
is,
metaphor.
isn't it? That book is metaphorical. Yeah. It's rich. I mean, that's what a great conversation, Sarah.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Lovely, lovely to
Yeah.
talk to you. Are you going to play a little sonata for me? I see your instrument.
This beautiful instrument, you know.
beautiful, 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 beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. That made my morning. Thank you
Yeah,
for that.
very good.
Okay.
Well,
Well, how can
welcome
I
back.
help you? If I can help anybody, let me know. I'm here to help. I think we need more voices, more diversity in the futures world because we need diverse futures. We need futures designed not just by dogs for cats, but by all the animals and plants and insects of the world,
Yeah,
right? So
and
right now, fortunately, it's skewed towards that's a certain species being designing the future for all of us. So I hope that I'm sure by your approach, Marcus, I'm a big fan. I'm sure that you're attracting all sorts of neurodivergent and brains
the
into.
energy is there. The energy is there, and that's what I like. And of course, the energy is like a pheromone, so you follow it. So I'm
Yep.
following this particular future at the moment, and it's providing, I think, a lot of joy for me, but it's also providing meaning, I think, for a lot of people. And I'm sure you'll get more interest in this too. It's wonderful stuff.
Right. Right. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
thank you, and we'll sign
Very
off.
well.
And I'll
Yeah.
probably get you again sometime. We'll find some
Sure.
other excuse to talk.
Oh, well, I'm happy to talk as many times as you want. This is delightful. But I would ask you questions. I would turn the tables and ask you
That's
questions.
right. It's nice to be asked in these situations. So I'm going to stop recording. Thank you.
Welcome.